Welcome to the Automation Insider. I'm your host, Joe McGrath, and I'm here today with Anthony Magazu of K.Hartwall, and we wanted to take an opportunity to discuss a little topic we're calling navigating automation. So when and where to deploy and or apply AMR and AGV technologies in today's modern operations. So Anthony, thank you very much for joining me. You want to give yourself a quick intro, maybe talk about your background very briefly?
Absolutely, yeah. First, thank you, Joe and Hy-Tek team for the invite, I guess. And first of all, great title. I'm guessing marketing had something to do with that because I know I couldn't come up with something like that. But Anthony Magazu, I'm the sales manager for K.Hartwall for automation in North America. Just a little bit of background, I guess, on K.Hartwall for those of you that don't know who we are. We are a 90 plus year family ran company that historically has really focused on load carrier solutions, but has slowly expanded that focus into automation and really AGVs or AGV AMRs. And we'll get into that a little bit, but specifically.
Okay, fantastic. Well, since you brought it up, kind of what are the big differences between an AGV and an AMR?
That's one of the first questions that I think a lot of customers are asking. And really, I think there's a lot of debate around that as well. But I think it kind of boils down to now really how they navigate more than anything. An AGV typically is following a fixed path, whereas an AMR has the autonomy to kind of travel or identify the best path or route to take. I guess that's the simplest form to kind of define an AGV or AMR.
And for those following along at home, an AGV is an automated guided vehicle versus an AMR, which is an autonomous mobile robot. And I feel like even saying the two names doesn't actually distinguish what you just kind of elegantly put into words there. It's really the navigation, right? That really makes it a lot different.
Sure. And I think, again, historically, or let me take a step back. AGVs and AMRs have been around for a long time, but still very early on in the solution itself, right? And it's really kind of grown and evolved, or the technology has. So the defining AMRs and AGVs has slowly changed as well, because both AMRs and AGVs have become much more flexible in terms of the overall solution. But again, when it boils down to it, I think it really kind of just depends on how it's navigating and that fixed path.
Now, like both of these types of machines can move a whole bunch of different loads, right? So I want to kind of take a second to talk about like what kind of things can AMRs, AGVs move, and maybe some of the pros and cons or some of the things to know about that.
Yeah, I think really when you're looking in an operation or in a facility, any time that you see material or product moving, it could essentially, an AMR or AGV can move the same thing. So whether it's on a shelf, it could be a stand, a pallet, carts, tugger trains, whatever it may be, conveyor. An AMR and AGV can essentially do the same thing, or a certain solution or AMR or AGV can do the same thing.
Okay, yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, I see a lot of the AMRs that are like pallet on shelf. So like there's like a metal square that the pallet kind of sits on, and they go in and move it around. But I think K.Hartwall is probably very well suited to this particular question. A lot of times, I don't want to put the pallet on a shelf, or I don't want to put it on a stand. So you have to, some AMRs, the real good ones, can actually access pallets directly from the floor, and they can move them kind of to another piece of the floor.
Yeah. And I think there are certain use cases and applications that require certain types of solutions. K.Hartwall has really focused on a niche application or workflow in that pallet, floor to floor, sometimes conveyor to floor material movement. But there are certainly other types of applications where order fulfillment, where it's going to be a tote or some type of case or whatever it may be. But yeah, K.Hartwall is really focused on that pallet point-to-point material movement. When you're looking at long-distance horizontal transport or pallet movement that has a ton of throughput for us.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. And kind of a little side question, but not all pallets, especially in the U.S. market, are created equal.
Sure.
Talk about some of the challenges you guys have kind of had to overcome in order to have a vehicle that can go point to point, like pretty successfully, like, you know, with the variety of U.S. pallets. What are some things to think?
Yeah, I mean, really, even outside of pallets too, when you're looking at automation or AGVs and AMRs, consistency is a big piece of that. And as you know, inside certain operations, it's not always the most consistent in terms of what a payload may be, right? So we have two types of AGVs, or what we call an A-mate. That's really our AGV fleet. We have a free lift, which is more geared towards that Euro style pallet or payload. And then we have our A-mate counter, which is more geared towards our GMA style pallet. But especially when you get into the forklift style AGVs, that payload becomes super important just due to the types of pallets and the fork pockets that help us go and pick up that payload.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've worked in operations where, like, they tell you the pallet's the pallet, and then every pallet's different. Sometimes they'll tell you it's an A grade pallet, and it's definitely a broken pallet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are tons of challenges just with, again, broken pallets. Sometimes wrapped pallets that can throw off the fork pockets, and it's a little bit tougher to detect that a pallet is there or the fork pockets are there. But there are changes in the technology that have really evolved over the past couple of years that have certainly been beneficial.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's and a lot of times, if you're comparing like a forked like vehicle that's going to pick up the pallet directly versus something that's going to pick it up off of a stand or pick it up off of a shelf, you guys have to do a lot more sensing, kind of detecting the environment and the load, and then make a decision about that load. Whereas if it's on a shelf, you just kind of, the shelf's dimensions, you just run up under it and away you're going. I'm oversimplifying that a ton.
Sure. Well, you sound like a sales guy right now, because I certainly oversimplify it. But I think, no, you're right. There are pros and cons to all solutions, right? And there are certain applications that require some type of stand for the pallet to sit on, or what we would call an underrider, where the AMR or AGV is going to go under the stand or a pallet transfer station and then pick the pallet up. And again, there are certainly pros and applications that require that type of solution, but that is additional cost, that's additional space that a lot of these facilities don't necessarily have to give up, right? Because those pallet stands can be pretty large, and it's tough to fit a number of those in to the facility when you're also implementing the AGVs itself. So absolutely. And I think what we've done at K.Hartwall in identifying that pallet floor to floor material movement is we've truly been able to eliminate that human touch, and pick up a pallet by ourselves and drop it off by itself. When you have that pallet transfer station there, somebody has to place the pallet on that pallet transfer station. So there is still some human element or human touch involved that we can essentially eliminate.
Very cool. So let's take a little different tack here. What are some kind of primary use cases you see AMRs and AGVs actually getting implemented into?
I feel like this is probably an endless topic, and we could probably go for an hour plus on just this topic alone. But I would say, go ahead.
I was going to say, we can flip it around. When should you not? Like
Well,
what are the applications to stay away from?
Well, yeah, I think just in terms of applications, right? I don't know. We could say stay away from them, but we're looking at things like order fulfillment, replenishment, transportation of raw materials, work in progress applications like on a manufacturing line, something like that, finished goods, inbound, outbound handling. But I think when it's an application that you want to stay away from, it really boils down to the throughput isn't there, right? Or maybe the distance traveled isn't there, and then that kind of gets into the whole ROI discussion, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit. But AGVs and AMRs and automation as a whole can be viewed as a complex solution, and it is, but it's also very black and white. So it either makes sense or it doesn't. When it does make sense, typically you have, again, that long distance traveled or long distance transport, and there's a ton of throughput, and it makes more sense for that particular company or operation to put their people in higher value add jobs versus picking something up and taking it from point A to point B all day long.
Make the people do what people are good at, and make the robots, kind of do the robot stuff, right? Long distance travel, heavy lifts.
Absolutely. Sure. And there are multiple solutions. Again, ours is more focused on that floor to floor material movement. There are certain types of AGVs that are VNA or very narrow aisle solutions where they're putting away at higher levels. And then there are other order fulfillment where they're involving picking type of solutions or pick to light or something like that. But we've really just focused on that point to point material movement. We're going to pick it up at point A, drop it off at point B, and do the same thing over and over again.
So in terms of like environments that you often see this, like these type of machines like put in, like I would assume like manufacturing type of environments where I want to maybe feed a line or take something away would be pretty popular. Like where do you see these machines getting implemented really successfully?
Yeah, I think manufacturing for sure is first and foremost, at least for our solution. And I think a lot of AGVs. I think once you get into AMRs, you can get a lot more into distribution centers and warehouse types of environments. But I would say AGVs and other AMR solutions are really geared towards that manufacturing industrial type of environment, especially when you get into the replenishment or the work in progress types of applications, and then obviously the finished goods as well.
Okay, very interesting. And so, slightly different dimension on the same question, but what kind of scale typically like makes sense? And I know sometimes people will do like maybe a crawl, walk, run approach to automation, which AMRs and AGVs really do lend themselves well to.
Sure.
Starting small and going big later on. But what kind of range of size do you see that makes a ton of sense for folks typically?
Yeah, I think especially working from a European company, for me, I've seen that the European market is certainly further along than the US. And I think we're all of our customers are at different points in their automation journey, but very much so they see it as an investment. And instead of going all in right off the bat, like you said, it's that crawl, walk, run type of phase where they want to see the solution, get used to the solution, the technology, and then hopefully scale it within their operation, right? But that crawl, walk, run phase is super important. If there's a particular application that calls for a larger fleet size, I think some of the challenges or potential roadblocks that you want to be aware of are certainly traffic control. So are you going to be working alongside people? Is there going to be manual forklifts traveling around in there as well? Is it a mixed fleet in terms of AMRs and AGVs? And then really, even if it's a larger fleet size, can your space or your facility handle that fleet size as they're traveling around and navigating autonomously?
Yeah. I think maybe on the small end of that scale thing is a pretty interesting maybe case study, if you will. But let's say we have a fairly low throughput. You
Sure.
can implement a single AMate, let's say, right? And
Sure.
that could absolutely be the case. But if it's really low throughput, like an alternative like pallet conveyor might just be bonkers. And so, like, traditionally folks would say, hey, listen, we'll just move with the forklift and deal with it. And now there's an option for a very small scale, high automation like solution, which I think is killer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in addition to a specific application, you can also utilize it cross-functionally within different parts of the facility as well. So if there is low throughput, maybe it's moving or transporting pallets 2 to 3 times within a shift. Maybe let's look at utilizing that same unit and utilizing it across multiple applications or workflows to help get you an even better ROI.
Oh, so you could have it maybe do a staging move as well as, pick up a Gaylord of corrugate and take it to the trash area. You could fill multiple roles. As a
Yeah, absolutely. And that can all be done through the scoping process. Basically what you're doing is you're uploading a map, creating routes, and then different tasks with pickup points and drop off points. So whatever the application, you're still picking it up at point A, dropping off at point B. If you're not performing a task, you can either go charge, or let's say application number 3 needs to be picked up. You go over to that pickup point, pick up the pallet, drop it off at point B, and then just continue down your list of tasks.
I think it's a pretty important insight, because that's something that like traditional, like let's say pallet conveyor doesn't do. It's kind of a non-starter, right? Like it goes from point A to point B. It might do it kind of fast, but that's all it's going to do.
That's all it's going to do. It's not flexible for operations that are changing really. I mean, even daily at this point. I mean, we get a call from customers and say, hey, last week we were doing this. We're going to be doing this week. What do we need to do? And honestly, once you're trained up on our solution and really any AGV, it's as simple as reworking the maps, reworking the routes, and performing different tasks. But yeah, conveyor, you're kind of fixed to this is what it's doing. The pallets are coming in this inbound and they're going out this outbound, and there's not a lot of flexibility there in a changing operation or changing environment.
So kind of an interesting segue. I'm going to skip one of our questions. We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
But that, I think, speaks a little bit to your return on investment. You're treating this thing like an investment, and you have the opportunity to use it in a multitude of ways. It's
Sure.
Pretty light reconfiguration, right?
Yep.
So let's say today you're doing a stage move with it, and tomorrow you want to use it to pick up all your corrugate. Or during peak, you're doing operation A, and during off season, you're doing 5 other, ancillary operations. Like that's the same piece of equipment. There's not necessarily any additional purchases to change what you're doing, and you don't have any monuments created. Do you any way to calculate that into your return on investment, or like how do you guys approach that when you're talking with customers?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people look at ROI differently, or a lot of our customers look at ROI differently or measure it differently. But I would say typically they're shooting for roughly a 3 to 5 year ROI, and that could be measured in a number of different ways. It's either reduced labor costs, increasing their productivity, reduced safety infractions, there's cost avoidance, lower turnover rates, whatever it may be. But again, it really just kind of boils down to the the number of movements happening and whatever that overhead, and typically that it kind of comes back to your labor, your people, right? So it can be measured a number of different ways, but that's certainly one thing that, or the thing that customers are asking about, and it either makes sense or it doesn't, because it boils down to a simple math equation where it's, hey, yeah, you're going to see the ROI in 3 years, or you're going to see the ROI in a year and a half sometimes.
I think it is almost like a little advantage to something that's so reconfigurable, though. Like, let's say you have a 3-year ROI on a piece of conveyor or an AGV. The conveyor has to do that process the same way for 3 years in order to achieve that 3-year payback. Whereas, let's say you're running an AMA and that process changes at year 1. You could, as long as you have provided enough cycles to offset, whatever that labor or that plan was, it's kind of a lower risk, way to look into the future. Like, I just want to, supplement a bunch of moves in the future versus I want this particular process to run at this speed.
Sure. Yep. And I think that's when you really start to look at the cost avoidance, right? Because if a company is looking to change how materials moving throughout their facility, that cost avoidance comes into play when they would have to spend money to change out their conveyor or reconfigure it a different way or whatever it may be. And we're just essentially changing routes and changing pickup points and drop-off points. And again, either expanding the fleet or using that same unit or that same fleet cross-functionally. So you can make changes very easily, which is super beneficial to customers.
Yeah, it's like a way lower risk too for an investment, right? Like you're pretty sure you can make it work even if stuff does change. And
Right.
we get a lot of conversations about like, what if X, Y, and Z change for me? And sometimes they're tough conversations if you have a lot of like very fixed infrastructure. Speaking of fixed infrastructure, do you see a lot of discussion about CapEx versus OpEx or RAS, or does that come up a lot when you talk to customers about these systems?
It does, and I don't want to pretend like I'm any type of financial guru by any means, right? But I do think OpEx certainly gives you the ability to realize the ROI a little bit sooner, just because there's no capital investment up front, or at least not as big of a capital investment. So there are certainly customers that are asking about that. I think typically they try to keep it in the same structure, essentially, that they utilize or acquire their manual fleet as well. So if they're doing those CapEx, they typically try to do the same thing for their automation, or vice versa. If they're typically working from or with a lender on different leasing or RAS models, they'll do the same thing from an AGV perspective as well.
Interesting. Okay. Now let's take a step back to a question I skipped over that I told you I was going to ask. But
Sure.
When designing systems, and you talked about a little bit with what are they doing with their manual fleet? How do you design systems where you're going to operate both AGVs and powered industrial trucks in the same building? What are some considerations that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think, and this is going to vary obviously by solution, but I think for us, which is certainly a key differentiator for us as well, is your space constraints. I mean, a lot of solutions have restraints on one-way traffic, two-way traffic, operating space within aisles, how much space is needed to pick up a pallet, to drop off a pallet. Same for the underwriters, right? I mean, you need that space required for those pallet transfer stations. And then it goes back into the traffic control as well. So is it a high traffic area where there's traffic lights? Is there going to be foot traffic there? That's something to always make note when when you're scoping out a solution. But I think it really kind of boils down to all the space restrictions and space necessary for a solution to be able to, one, navigate, and then two, operate.
I've gotten to play with your vehicles a little bit, and I'd say that they're actually very safe. You can work around them as a pedestrian or on a forklift, but it definitely, like, it's this kind of theme I see a lot. Like, it seems like you're going to get a better throughput if you just remove all manual operators from that environment. If you can design a building that way, right? So you'd have an AMR area or an AGV area, and that
Sure.
would be somewhat geographically distinct from a powered industrial truck or a pedestrian work area. Sure. Not for a safety thing, but just for speed. Do you often try to design them that way, or do you find a lot of customers trying to merge the two environments?
I would say right now it's merging the two environments.
Interesting.
Sure. Ideally, we would love to have our own dedicated area, but I think especially with our specific workflow in that pallet floor to floor movement, you're typically involving us in just a certain piece of a workflow where we have to essentially communicate and work alongside manual forklifts as well. So there's typically some manual forklifts bringing a pallet down from racking and placing it in a certain area, and then we're taking it to outbound or whatever it may be, or vice versa. Okay. Or we're picking up off of conveyor and we're taking it to a shrink wrap machine, and then it's going to be picked up there by a manual truck and shipped out, or whatever it may be. But I would say right now, probably 98% of our applications are being mixed into pedestrian traffic and then manual forklift traffic as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's higher than I thought. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, like right before the question, and you talked a little bit about the safety piece. I mean, we have, you get questions all the time, right? Because it's, when you're worried about a forklift style AGV navigating autonomously, safety is going to be one of the the key questions that a customer has, and they're like, gosh, what if this runs into someone or runs into something? And without getting into the weeds of the technology as a whole, the only answer you can really give them is it's not going to do it. It's not going to run into anything. It will stop. So I think, as I'm sure you already know, the most expensive asset in a building is the person driving a forklift, a manual forklift. And that is the number one safety issue within industrial environments in the U.S. and I would imagine in the world. There's a ton of accidents, and you just don't get that with AMRs or AGVs.
Yeah, I've been a supervisor for a long time, and I've seen people hit stuff, and I'm probably more sure that an AGV sees me than I am a forklift driver with a whole bunch on his mind, and it's 5 minutes before break, right? One of those makes me a little bit more nervous when I'm on around.
Yeah. There is no doubt. These, most, if not all, solutions are built, manufactured to adhere to OSHA requirements and a number of other safety standards that the U.S. has. You just don't get those types of accidents with AMRs or AGVs. Yeah,
I think it's. Yeah, once you see them move through an environment, you're like, oh, like this actually does seem like it's a consistent movement. It's everything's being checked all the time. Like it's very metered. Like it just feels like a little bit safer and like more solid too.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of customers ask to, prior to making that leap and making that investment, right, is, hey, can we get this can we get this on site and see some type of demo? Ideally, we would love to sell all of our units without doing a demo, but they want to see, they want to see it on site. They understand that it can lift 2,200 pounds and that it has obstacle avoidance capabilities, but can it lift our 2,200 pounds and can it move around our obstacles within our facility? And once they see it in their environment, it creates a level of comfort and confidence in taking that leap of faith and putting up that investment and that capital.
Perfect segue into the next topic I wanted to hit you up on. But maintenance, downtime, and environmental conditions for these trucks. So as a person that's been a customer before, I'd love to see it run in my environment before I buy it. Because what if I have loads with some kind of crazy center of gravity, or I think the pallets are good pallets, but how good is a good pallet? You know what I mean? Or my floor is just so trashed that I can't actually do this, or do I need to do some repairs before I get in here? Is there problems with lights? Who knows? What kind of can of worms you could be opening? From environmental conditions, what do you see as kind of the minimum viable product to get a machine operational?
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is tougher to measure specifically, right? Hey, how do you measure whether or not the floor is good or not? And I think there are certain elevations, or there's certain gap requirements and things like that. But from just a floor perspective, if you have your standard smooth manufacturing floor, you're going to be fine. Now, if there's areas where it gets pretty bumpy, that can certainly become a challenge, but there are ways around that just with floor maintenance and whatever it may be. The center of gravity thing is certainly a big piece, right? And I think consistency is key when you're looking at AGVs or AMRs, at least from a payload perspective. So is the center of gravity going to be the same? Is the capacity going to be the same on all the payloads? If not, what are some workarounds that we could do? We've been in communication with a tire distributor, and currently how they're picking off of their tire racks, they're just picking tires up off of different areas throughout the tire rack. And one thing for our solution to be able to work, they're going to have to pick in certain areas to make sure that center of gravity doesn't change, because that can become a huge red flag when we go to pick up that payload, right? So that's a big piece. I would say most, if not all, solutions typically need to work in ambient temperatures. Once you're in and out of a different change of temperature, you can create some type of condensation over the cameras or sensors that can become a challenge. I'm sure there are freezer application or solutions for freezer applications. K.Hartwall doesn't provide that. So we're typically above freezing, and I think below 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So there are certain things that you look at throughout the scoping process, but all that is vetted out throughout that.
Yeah, and you were talking about the floor a little bit. You can measure FF, FL, flatness, but that almost doesn't even tell the whole story, right? What if there's a lot of pieces of wood? What if there's excessive traffic? Do you guys kind of evaluate that when you go check out a site? Is there a scorecard for that, or you just kind of in your mind know that maybe I have to run the bots a little bit longer to get through this particular area?
No, yeah, there are certainly things that we take note of. With the pallet specifically, a lot of times we ask customers to send us a pallet so we can just do testing on our own to ensure that we have no issues. One, identifying it, and then two, picking it up and dropping it off. I would say other parts of the scoping process, high traffic areas again are always a big one, and I think sometimes if it doesn't make sense at face value, there are things that can be changed throughout the customer's operation, because it really is a little bit of a mindset shift for the customer as well. So there are things that need to change from the customer's perspective, whether it's consistency within how they're picking, where they're dropping, different traffic restrictions or rules. Hey, if you get to an intersection with a manual forklift, the AGV is going to go first, or maybe they want the manual forklift just to fly by and let the AGV wait and pass along after. So there are certain rules put into place as you're implementing or deploying that fleet, but there's certainly a mindset shift there as well.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that mindset shift or that like kind of general change management in operations. I've seen a number of times where a company might get really excited about technology, purchase an AMR, and then 6 months goes by and that AMR tends to be parked in a corner kind of collecting dust because they didn't use it right, or the operators didn't like it, or there was some kind of pushback, even though the original business case is still a good business case.
Yeah.
So that's kind of heartbreaking for like people in the automated space. What do you guys see as like kind of the keys to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and maybe this is on the individual salesperson, I've certainly noticed it at prior companies I've worked with, and now K.Hartwall as well. I certainly make it a priority to identify a site champion wherever this fleet is going to be deployed, because you could have all the buy-in in the world from upper management, even at the executive level, but if you don't have someone there on site that's going to take ownership of it, really invest in the solution as a whole, and use it correctly how it's going to be used, then it's not going to work. So I like to make sure I've identified a site champion and really laid out the right expectations, both for them and for ourselves, and try to hold each other accountable to those expectations. Because without that, the solution's not going to be successful, because a lot of things need to either change within the operation, and we also need to ensure that we're supporting the customer at the highest level as well. So laying out the right expectations and holding each other accountable to those are very important.
So I think the idea of a site champion or like a technology champion is like excellent. Like this doesn't need to be a person that is like an automation like ace. It's just got to be somebody that is like pretty open-minded, somebody that like can see the benefit for themselves and kind of wants to spread the gospel, for a lack of a better word. Is that the right kind of person to find? I
would say that's a perfect way to put it, and spreading the gospel. I'm going to actually start using that. But yeah, I would say this: if I can learn the solution, anybody can learn the solution. And I think you don't have to be overly technical. You don't have to get into the weeds of the technology. There's trainings on how to utilize it, how to make changes within maps and routes and things like that. But it's really just someone that's going to take ownership of it and use it correctly.
Okay, very cool. What do you see as kind of the future of AGVs and AMRs in the industry? Where do you think it's going to go next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I think the two things that every customer are asking about, and really the one thing that every customer is asking. I've never been in a customer where they haven't asked for trailer loading and unloading.
Oh yeah.
And I think there are potentially some solutions out there that are doing it. I don't know how well they're doing it, and if they've really kind of taken ownership of that specific type of application. But the trailer loading and unloading is the big piece. And I think as all of these solutions start, if they continue to evolve to where I think they're going, that's going to move into essentially what they're calling a lights out type of operation, where you have automation kind of handling the entire operation without any human touch or intervention. So you can essentially turn the lights off and your whole facility or operation is going to continue to run.
Yeah, that's kind of like the holy grail. Everybody talks about it, and like on the face of it, it seems like this should totally be possible. But there's like a couple of things that like just really like make it like the loading and unloading of trailers automatically. I think is like probably that's like the bleeding edge of this variety of technology.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah. There has not been a customer that hasn't asked me about that. Like, hey, as you're walking out the door, just want to make sure, can you do trailer unloading and loading? No, you can't. Okay. Just had to ask. So it's top of mind for every single customer. And again, I think there are some solutions out there that are saying they can do it. I don't know enough about them to say they're good or not, but customers are still asking about it. I know that.
Well, even when you go to trade shows now, like Modex ProMat, and you see like a lot of activity, and it's all the newest research. It's things that people are piloting now. Tons of big names from like both customers and that invest in research and people that are doing a bunch of like prototyping.
Right.
There's like the variety of ways that people are proposing to automatically load and unload trailers is pretty impressive.
It is.
It's not just one. It's not just like, hey, this is the way you do it. It's every flavor.
It is. Yeah. There's multiple types of ways that they're attempting to do it, and I think the reason it's so tough is, I mentioned a lot about the consistency. With those applications, there's a lot of inconsistency. So it's really tough to say, hey, here's the best way of doing it. And some of the solutions I've seen, they might be good at loading or unloading for a specific type of industry or vertical. If it's, I don't know, like cross-docking type of solutions, or companies that have like some type of short distance transportation where they keep the unit on the truck itself or whatever it may be. And then there's other ones that I've seen where there's a little bit more infrastructure involved. But yeah, there's a lot out there. And it's whoever gets a hold of that one first is going to make a lot of money. I know that much because there's not a single company that's not willing to invest into that, because it's just it's a huge time suck for customers.
Yeah, it's like it's the last thing that's not like readily automated.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Speaking of cutting edge, like you guys do, this is the last question from me.
Yeah.
You guys do something that is kind of novel, and I've not seen it in a lot of other places. And it's not a lights out thing. This is a collaborative working thing. But you can pick up a pallet that's been set down skewed in like a stage lane and figure out how to get this pallet that's just kind of a little bit wacky, like in a big staging lane or a bulk aisle. I forgot the name of the functionality. Are you familiar with this?
Well, we have a 3D pallet detection.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny because I do talk a lot about consistency. That's, I guess, one area where it doesn't need to be as consistent.
You've overcome that particular thing, because a lot of applications, like I've got to put that pallet down, like let's say it's on a pallet stand, like within like millimeters or inches, depending on how big that pallet is relative to the stands. I have to be very accurate, but I could drop something in your stage lane and it could be turned a little bit and not necessarily accurate, and you could still pick that up and manipulate it the way I need it to be manipulated, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah. I think, again, that kind of goes back to one of our key differentiators. I mean, there's lane staging is certainly a tough one, just because you do need, historically with AGVs, you need some consistency with how manual trucks are dropping off pallets. With ours, it can be, gosh, I wish I had my application engineer on here to talk about the exact measurements, but it can be off almost at like a 45-degree angle for us to be able to still identify the pallet and autonomously spear the pallet to pick it up.
Yeah, I was working on an application a little while back, and I was like, well, walkie driver's not going to put it down right. And then the result was it's fine. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, and again, it still goes back to like that mindset shift a little bit for operators when they're going to be working alongside these AGVs, right? Because they know that the pallet they drop off is going to be picked up by an AGV, but sometimes they just want to drive as fast as they can, drop it off, and go on to their next task.
YOLO it.
Yeah, but they don't realize that it's got to be dropped off a certain way so it can be picked up a certain way. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility with our solution in terms of how we can identify that pallet and how that pallet is sitting, for sure. It doesn't have to be overly accurate.
Very cool. All right. Any other kind of closing comments? Anything you want to say out there to the audience, who may be watching?
I think for any customers that may be watching, I'm sure everyone's at a different point in their automation journey. But I would say a lot of people know K.Hartwall for historically roll cages. We have a very good solution with our AIM8 line. While it may be niche in terms of workflow and that pallet floor to floor material movement, there are a lot of things that we do well, and the reason why our solution is so good. And being able to operate in much tighter spaces than a lot of our competition, that the flexibility and really the being fleet manager agnostic is I think a big one as well. So, but other than that, no, I just want to thank you and thank the Hy-Tek team for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, you guys are a great partner for us. So, I'm glad we get this in the books.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you very much out there for tuning into the Automation Insider. Follow us wherever you subscribe to podcasts, or head on over to the Hy-Tek website, Hy-Tek Intralogistics, and follow along for more.